Next item on the agenda is the declarations of possible conflicts of interest. Does anybody have a conflict to declare? Hearing none, the next item on our agenda is delegations. So delegations from the public allow for a 5-minute delegation, and then trustees have up to 3 minutes to ask questions of clarification of the delegates. We ask that all delegates follow the TDSB's code of conduct and respect for other persons in the room. And our first delegate is Jennifer Skilton from Learning Center 2. So there's a timer up behind me, and I'll give you a wave.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
So good afternoon, and thank you so much for the work that you do every day for students, schools, and our community. My name is Jennifer Skilton, and I am an early reading coach in Learning Center 2. I support Highland Heights and Linwood Heights Junior Public Schools. To start off this afternoon, I would like to share the importance of reading and the role of an early reading coach. In 2022, the Ontario Human Rights Commission released its Right to Read report, a public inquiry into human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities. The data is alarming. We know through grade 1 reading data, grade 3 and grade 6 EQAO scores, the grade 10 OSSLT, and TDSB dropout rates that historically we have not met every student's needs. Reading is a foundational skill. Without proper interventions and accommodations, people with reading difficulties may never learn to read and may have difficulty with other subjects in school, for example, science, social studies, and math. Along with academic problems, this can also lead to social and emotional effects, including increased stress and anxiety, problems with self-image, and depression. In adulthood, low literacy can lead to underemployment and higher rates of homelessness, incarceration, and suicide. I am here to discuss 2 critical issues that will interrupt the work that early reading coaches are doing in our schools and will interrupt the positive impact that we can make between now and the end of the school year. The first issue is that we just found out that early reading coaches will be redeployed to supply teach for the remainder of the school year. This means that my work as an early reading coach in our schools will stop, and our most vulnerable readers and students will not receive the reading support they need at the most crucial time of the year. I support over 100 students and their educators in 2 schools, and that isn't very many. Some of my colleagues support more schools than that. And right now their reading scores are approximately 50% of where they need to be by the end of the school year. We're almost there. Students are making excellent progress, but we're not there yet. Right now, we are doing the most intensive work of the year, so students will be able to read by the end of June at levels 16 to 20 with the ability to make meaning from print. I urge the TDSB to not redeploy the early reading coaches because, as we know through data in the Right to Read report and through the TDSB's research department, that early intervention is key and that coaching builds sustainable change in teaching practice. We know that this benefits students in both the short and the long term. Once grade 1 is over, the gap will widen and early reading coach support will not be available anymore. This brings me to my second point. Early reading coaches were not funded in the budget for next year. The work that early reading coaches do in schools is critical to student success. Our work goes beyond just supporting early reading intervention with individual students. Our work is done in collaboration with educators to build sustainability for their professional development. When we work with teachers, students benefit year after year because teaching practice changes through coaching. The research department studied the effectiveness of coaching, and our impact has been well documented over the past 6 years. I would like to finish my delegation with a focus on the multi-year strategic plan, goals, the TDSB mission, and its vision. Its focus is simple: to ensure that every student receives a great education by having equitable access to programs and resources and increased opportunities to lead to success. Please keep early reading coaches in schools. This plan and its action plans lay the groundwork for how we will transform student learning, create a culture of well-being, provide access to learning opportunities, allocate resources strategically, and build strong partnerships. The early years system goal: all students in grade 1, regardless of their social identity, will be able to read with confidence, fluency, understanding, and enjoyment. Please keep early reading coaches in schools for May and June. Do not send us to supply teach. Leverage our expertise and keep us in schools. Every TDSB student has a right to read, and our role supports this human right. Fund this role next year. It means sustainable impact for reading success and positive life outcomes for our most vulnerable students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have questions of clarification for our trustees, from trustees.
Apologies.
So we have a question from trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much. I think most of us learned about the redeployment. I'll just speak for trustees when we started receiving emails from staff, because it's seen as being an operational issue.
Yes.
But can you clarify for me, when you say keep reading coaches in schools, my understanding is reading coaches aren't school-based staff, but considered central staff. Is that your understanding?
So reading coaches are centrally assigned, but we work in schools with students and teachers every day.
Thank you. I just wanted that clarification because we haven't done any central staffing yet, even those that work in schools.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I don't see any more questions, but I would ask if, I see you were reading from a prepared statement, if you could email that to the delegates' email address, and then it can be shared with all trustees.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegates are together as Angela Janetta and Angelique Thompson from Learning Center 1. So you'll have 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll have questions of clarification. So when you're ready, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Angelique Thompson.
My name is Angela Janetta. We are early reading coaches in Learning Center 1. We are here to address the committee about the proposed cuts to all early reading coaches in the TDSB. This is a difficult time in education. Difficult decisions need to be made. We felt we had a responsibility to provide information and facts about the work we do to help you make the best decision for learners while remaining fiscally responsible. Our intent is to provide you with a summary of our work and its impact on student success and educator classroom practices.
Every day, we work passionately to get children to read with confidence, fluency, understanding, and joy. We are here to share our story. Our LC1 team has 5 coaches. We support 29 schools from Thorncliffe Park to Humberwood. This includes 173 kindergarten to grade 2 and special education classrooms. We partner with 263 educators. Our work reaches approximately 3,460 learners. This is the reach for our team of 5. We are a team of 20. The scope of our role is not narrow.
Not only is our role connected to the TDSB's multi-year strategic plan and the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report, we are also committed to the system's priorities of centering joy and belonging and addressing disproportionate outcomes for children. I know that coaching is having an impact when I work at Silverthorne every week and I see the eyes of children light up when they can relate to characters and stories and make meaningful connections to their lives. When the educator and I co-planned and co-taught with the book Mommy's Kimar, The children became very excited as they learned new vocabulary. They eagerly shared words from the languages spoken with their families that connected to the story. Learners were able to practice difficult word patterns from the book. A child in grade 2 grew in their reading and writing abilities. They went from reading and writing simple 2- and 3-letter words to more complex 4- and 5-letter words with fluency.
The impact of coaching also lives with kindergarten learners. I have witnessed the joy of children at Albion Heights who listen to stories about characters and their names. Reading books like My Name is Sajjan Singh sparks curiosities about their own names. Children shared questions with their families about why their names were chosen. Families excitedly shared beautiful naming traditions and practices connected to their cultures. During lessons and playful experiences I co-planned with the educator, children explored letters and syllables in their names. These foundational skills gave children the opportunity to become confident in reading and writing their names. One learner beamed with pride when he was able to independently write all the letters of his name for the first time. These stories live all around us and are a snapshot of the impact of early reading coaches. Our colleagues and supporters are holding picture books that have impacted thousands of learners through our collaborative work in classrooms. Our work with educators is sustainable because impactful learning happens in relationships. We can challenge existing practices with care. Coaching cycles have a lasting, positive impact on student learning.
Our roles as early reading coaches are unique. Our work is not siloed. We work intensively with children and partner with educators to build literacy skills across the curriculum. The professional learning we offer is personalized, from school to school and classroom to classroom based on learning needs. We work in multiple contexts, like French immersion programs, diagnostic kindergartens, and virtual school classrooms. We collaborate with community partners, like community support workers and early on educators. TDSB's own research department concluded that the ERC role is indispensable and shared its impact in 2 reports dated 2019 and 2022.
Children are more than just a reading level. Learning is complex and educators need support. When we as educators know better, we do better. With the announced changes to the language curriculum, educators and children will continue to require the intentional and strategic support coaching offers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have questions now. So Trustee McLean, and then I have Trustee Earhart.
Thank you, and through the chair. Can you please clarify for me what makes, how your services in essence are required in that the grade teachers are unable to meet the learning objectives for all their students? And then also how it is that your assignments are chosen for, how you determine which classrooms in which schools you're dedicated to assist.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer the first part of the question, we work with educators based on the data that comes from the classroom. So any decision that we're making is in collaboration with that educator. So based on the learning needs of the students, we then create a plan of action together where we are going to implement intervention strategies. And it can be for the whole group, it can be for small group, it can be working one-on-one with the student. And then through that cycle, we continue to gather more data, more information, not just numbers. We are looking at how children are reacting to reading, their attitudes toward reading, how they're participating in the class, as well in terms of how they feel about reading. And the cycle continues. So as we implement our strategies, it's responsive. If something needs tweaking, we will come in with another strategy. The professional learning happens side by side with the educator. So for example, if I'm the learner and Angelique is the coach working with the educator, Angelique will be beside the educator where the children are, and they are working in tandem together while the learning is happening. So the coaching can happen in the moment. We can make changes in the moment.
And this provides sustainability because if we were just to work with that learner alone, providing intervention supports, which sometimes we do, but we're not connecting with the educators on what would be best classroom practices to share, then the cycle stops because there's no impact on educator changes and shifts to practice and pedagogy. And so if we can, it's sort of that analogy, if I can give you a fish, but if I teach you how to fish, then it's sort of that analogy of having to be able to work with teachers on what are the best strategies so they now have that in their toolboxes, in their pockets, so that they can use it in multiple contexts from school to school. And we've seen the impact because there are times when we might move from a school and be reassigned, and a new early reading coach comes in and the teacher is like, I'm ready to go, let's work together. Or a teacher moves to another school where there's no ERC support and they can communicate. Sometimes they send emails like, hey, look at what I did. Remember what you taught me last year? I'm using it again. So we want to think about that sustainability.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for your presentation. It's certainly very impactful to see everybody there with the books, and so thank you very much. For clarification, I just was wondering if you could repeat that early reading coaches are, I thought I heard junior kindergarten to grade 2. That was the first clarifying question. And then second, if what education or training early reading coaches have? Are you teachers? Are you teachers of training? What is the general training set of an early reading coach? And thank you very much.
Oh, okay. So for clarification, we do work with kindergarten to grade 2 classrooms. Yes, that is correct. So a specific group of learners. Early reading coaches, one of the things that is most important is that we hold specialists like reading specialists, kindergarten specialists. Many of us have special education qualifications as well. In addition to that, every year we engage in intense and rigorous professional learning through the early years department, through our learning center CAPS. So we are constantly engaged in professional learning around the best practices and new intentional strategies that we can use to support learners best and be most responsive.
And might I add as well that we also engage in professional learning on what coaching looks like. So with our centrally assigned principal, we will walk through coaching strategies through coaching conversations. So some of the coaching moves that we may do, for example, what modeling could look like, what teaching in tandem can look like. And we also engage in our own conversations around anti-oppression, anti-racism, and to kind of be able to address those in the moment, we're growing our understanding about that as well. So our professional learning goes beyond just the scope of reading. We really are there to learn and support the system priorities as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I may, I don't know if I still have time through the chair. I also wanted to ask if they are able to comment based on their experience around if the need is shifted in the context of the pandemic and where we are at the pandemic for this particular group of learners that they work with for early reading. I know as a parent of a 7-year-old, I feel like the use of early reading coaches has been very important in the life of my child, and so I've seen it firsthand. But wondering if they could share some observations they're seeing within their learning center. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are seeing the effects of the pandemic as well, and the beauty of our role is that it is responsive. So what it looks like in my schools may not be appearing in Angelique's schools, but we can adjust our professional learning model with the educators to address that. It's not a blanket.
Thank you. So next we have Trustee Ditavides.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. And through the chair, before I ask the question, I just want to thank you for the work you do. In the short time I've been a trustee, I've seen in a number of schools some of your colleagues and the work they do, and the administrators rave about that work, and I'm hoping we'll be able to continue what you do. Can you clarify for me what you would be doing over the months of May and June if you're transition over to a different role?
Sorry, Sorry, could you say the last?
So you're being transitioned to different roles, right?
Oh, do you mean with redeployment? What will that
Yeah.
look like? That will look like us covering classrooms with unfilled jobs. So we'll be pulled out of those classrooms that we have relationships with children. We kind of keep our schedules as most routine as possible for the little ones, so they look forward to Ms. Thompson coming in to work with them in a small group and read a picture book or do some work with them on their writing. So that will stop, and we will be asked to be stationed at a specific school of need. And I might be in a grade 6 classroom one day covering a grade 7 classroom. I don't know. But that's what it looked like the last time we were redeployed. We were placed where there was no filled job to just cover and be there. Sometimes without any lesson plans, without any preparations, it will change from day to day. So the morning that we enter the school that we're assigned to, we would then be told what the position would be for the day.
And can you maybe explain briefly, I think you mentioned it a little bit, what you think some of the impact may be in having a break with some of the children, some of the students, some of the teachers you're working with?
So our professional learning with our colleagues, our educator colleagues, stops. It'll just stop. Wherever we are in that cycle of learning and coaching with those learners in that classroom, it's done. So whatever strategies we've been able to impart on the educators, they will have those strategies, but our long-term plans for the rest of the year are done. They won't happen.
And this time is very pivotal because we're also doing a lot of assessments, collecting a lot of reading data to see how the children have progressed towards the end of the year. And so that will also stop as well as we support educators. The TDSB is invested in a lot of new assessments and inventories that we can use based on the science of reading that teachers are not quite as familiar with and comfortable with, that we've had many years of training with, and we're supporting with that as well. And what this means and how it translates to last steps for that last home stretch of learning, every day counts. The window for literacy acquisition is ages 4 to 7. This is a pivotal time for children.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Shan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thanks for the work that you're doing. As Trustee David just said, I've been able to see the work that you're doing in schools, and when I do the school visits, you have 2 books there that kind of outline equity right on the table, and many of you are holding it too. Is racial discrimination or racial inequities and other forms of inequities kind of one of the reasons you're seeing why students aren't reading at the level they're reading, and how does your work kind of counter that through resources?
So there's systemic pieces. We know that systemic oppression is occurring and it's playing out in our educational spaces. There's lots of different moving pieces to that. So what we are doing in that work is we are trying to dismantle that by offering practices that address the learning needs that will address those disproportionate outcomes for those learners. So it goes beyond just the teaching strategies. We are looking at things like on how we can welcome families and communities into the classroom. We are looking at things like the learning environment. So perhaps a classroom that may just be with rows of desks and chairs, we actually start thinking about how we can rearrange that environment so that it's more welcoming for all learners and all learning styles as well. So there's a multitude of things that we do in service of reading.
I think at the core of it, we want it to be culturally relevant and responsive. We think about Rudine Sims Bishop work, where she talks about mirrors, windows, and glass sliding doors. And so we want books to be mirrors of the children that we see, so that they see themselves and are more invested in the stories that they hear, that they have windows to other experiences and other identities, because we know that our world and our city is very multicultural, and glass sliding doors that transport them into spaces beyond their imagination to spark that foundation and love and joy of reading. So our work is very much grounded in culturally relevant and responsive practices, And as you can see, a lot of the books are very much ones that when I was a child, I did not see myself in school spaces. And we know that that's so important for addressing outcomes.
So is it, in terms of the students that you see, is there a high disproportionality in terms of students of racialized communities that you're supporting? And also, do you see you having an impact on the educator in understanding this pedagogy from an anti-racist framework as well?
Yes.
So do you see disproportionately high racialized students in the students that you support compared to the student population in general?
Yes. Yes.
And do teachers understand equity better because you're there in addition to reading techniques?
Yes.
Thank you. And we have a question from online from Trustee Rajkulasingham.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming in today and to speaking on something that's so incredibly important. I think we can all agree on the importance of building those reading skills in our young learners, and especially that confidence so they don't feel left behind as they grow older. So you mentioned that, building relationships with those students when you are working in schools as an intervention. Can you share with us how long you may be working with a particular student? Like, does it vary from skill and need? And how long does kind of each session with a student or class, how long could that look like?
Yeah. So it does vary. It does vary from school to school, from classroom to classroom, from small group to small group. So that's where the beauty of coaching lies, is that it is responsive in that moment. So, like, for example, at one of the schools that I mentioned where we were reading this book, there is a small group of students that I'm working alongside the educator with, and we have been doing that for a couple of weeks now. On a weekly basis, I'm there. But I am imparting the skills and strategies to the educator, so that work is happening when I'm not there. So it doesn't lie with me. It doesn't rest with me. It doesn't rest with Angelique. We are sharing the skills with the educator so that it can continue. That's the sustainability of it. And then those skills and strategies with another group that may come up, that educator will have those skills to be able to then address that learning need with that group. And I might not be involved with that group because the educator has got it. They've got it.
And I think what's important also is that we leverage technology to keep in constant communication. So the lessons that are being co-planned are co-planned on a regular basis, sometimes on a weekly basis. Again, we want to be most responsive. We know that children are unique and special, and so we don't want our programs to just be very cookie cutter. We want, when we get into classrooms and when we think about coaching, for it to be responsive to the school community, to the needs of the classroom, to the needs of the learners and the educators. So it does vary, but it's very much responsive.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for coming today. And I would ask, you have a written delegation that you can send it to the,
I even printed out some.
perfect. But if you have an electronic copy, you can email it then to the delegates email, then we can make sure that all trustees and the ones who aren't here today get a copy.
Thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we leave these with?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
please.
amazing. Do you want to put that other report in here?
Yep, sorry. Do you want me to take it out? Who do we give it to?
Chair, I just wonder if I could ask a question.
Sorry, yes. Trustee Chair Muslin has a question.
I just wonder, were learning coaches, were early reading coaches provided with any explanation as to why they were being redeployed?
We met with our executive superintendents today, and as it was explained to us, it had to do with fill rates. So there are schools that aren't able to fill teacher absences on a regular basis. So that's
Okay, and are these schools in particular, like, are we talking about particular areas of the city or particular schools on the LOI?
I would imagine. The school names weren't outlined to us, but that is our understanding.
Okay, so they are considered schools with considerable need. Is that your understanding?
That's our understanding, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We do really appreciate everything you're doing. My question doesn't mean it in any way as a to minimize the importance of the work you're doing in terms of early reading intervention and the importance of that. I just wanted to make sure that we all understand how that's being communicated with you and the reasons behind it. Because it's hard for me to imagine that this was a decision that was taken lightly by staff, as we know the importance of the work that you do with students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we move on to the next thing, could trustees who have joined the meeting since we started, joined online, please identify yourselves?
Trustee Dawson, present.
Trustee Lee's here.
Trustee Rajwani.
Thank you, and I would remind everyone that we have a hard stop today at 6:30, and that we have a special planning and priorities meeting scheduled for after our hard stop at 6:30. So the next item on our agenda is opportunity for oral updates from co-chairs of community advisory committees. And we have the Alternative Schools Community Advisory Committee report. And do you know who's speaking to this? Name?
Hi, it's Lori McAllister.
Oh, okay. So we have Lori McAllister and...
I think we had Jacob, but I think he just had to go to pick up his child from school, from aftercare.
I'm still here, Lori.
Oh, you're still here. Oh, there you are. We're here.
Okay, great. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Thank you very much for allowing us to present this afternoon. I'm Lori McAllister. I'm the secondary co-chair of the Alternative Schools Community Advisory Committee, ASAC, and Jacob, our new this year elementary co-chair, is also here. As you know, ASAC represents both elementary and secondary alternative schools, but today we're here to present the recommendation that we're able to present, which is the recommendation for secondary, which was approved by the ASAC voting membership on March 27th. For those who are not familiar, the populations of elementary and secondary alternative schools are dramatically different, with incredibly different needs and considerations that need to be taken into account. Secondary alternative schools provide a critical space in the system for students who face external challenges and challenges within the system, which increase their risk of not graduating. Many have spent time out of school or in attendance programs, have switched schools multiple times. They've been marginalized, left out, struggled with mental health, and just unsupported. I'm sorry, I have a cold today. In the mainstream. The impact of the pandemic is not over, and students who were already struggling in the system have become increasingly isolated and disengaged. And the masks may be off, but they really have not recovered. I know that the trustees on this committee have heard many times over the absolute life-saving impact that secondary alternative schools have had from past and current students. And for every student that you have heard from, there are many, many more who will never delegate in a setting like this, who can't delegate in a setting like this, but they deserve all of your support. Last year, we came to you because the same staffing formula based on projected enrollment is applied across all schools, and it sets an impossibly low starting point for the allocation of resources to secondary alternative schools. The impact of losing just one teacher or 0.5 of a teacher is devastating to these programs and to the students who need them. Some of these schools have less than 3 teachers for high schools with students who need credits from grades 10 through 12. And we know that cuts lead to more cuts. So if a school has low projected enrollment, it can't get staff, it can't offer the courses students need, resulting in lower enrollment and even more cuts. In the case of secondary alternative schools, low enrollment does not indicate lack of need. It indicates that these schools have not been supported for growth. One teacher can make the difference between offering courses that students need, not want, but need to graduate or not. We have these existing spaces in the system with incredible teachers and staff who see these students and they support them in a way that nobody else in their school career ever has. And these spaces need to be protected and they need to be supported and they need to be set up to benefit all students who need them. Last year, ASAC asked the board to stabilize secondary alternative schools by considering program viability as the primary driver for staffing rather than projected enrollment. And for your reference, the recommendation is included in the report as Part B. In consideration of all of the effort the committee put into that recommendation, I think it's also important to note that the committee recommendation provided a definition for program viability. It was not included in the copy of the recommendation that was circulated and considered, but hopefully carries through as the spirit and the intent of the recommendation are very clear. The board approved the recommendation as you see it in Part B, and the community is grateful for that support. The commitment to maintain the viability still applies now since the secondary alternative review has not taken place. And as you are considering next year's budget, we are here to ask you to please remember this commitment and these students who need your support. So ASAC's recommendation as approved on March 27th is whereas TDSB secondary alternative schools provide a lifeline for students who are affected by external challenges and challenges within the system, which put them at increased risk of being pushed out of the system, not returning to the system, not graduating, and the related risks to their well-being. And whereas the board has strongly committed to maintain the viability of secondary alternative school programming, therefore, the Alternative Schools Community Advisory Committee recommends that the board be reminded of its commitment to secondary alternative school programming and the students relying on the lifeline it provides in the board's review and approval of the 2023-24 operating budget. Thank you. And we would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. We have a question from Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Lori and Jacob, for being here and reminding us of our commitment. Obviously, you will have seen in the staffing that was confirmed, I believe, on March 29th, that we're not quite there yet. Do you have a number in mind about viability? Or as we did last year, this should be a conversation between the superintendent responsible for alternative schools and the principals in the alternative schools? Is that your understanding of how this should work?
So my understanding, I'm really sorry, but from last year, the committee did spend quite a bit of time in the meeting where we formulated this recommendation, speaking with staff and principals of the alternative schools, and came up with sort of this formula of what is required, what is the absolute minimum that is required in terms of number of teachers. And I think we also considered the CYW or CYCs for the schools, depending on the grades that they offered. So I don't have it handy.
No, don't worry. It's not coming up tonight, but I just,
yeah.
So you'd like us to refer back to all the work that the committee has done?
We would appreciate it if you
Definitely,
would
we'll bring that forward at the appropriate time when we're talking about the operating budget. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you and Jacob for your work.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. So I need a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor. I have Trustee Laskin and Trustee McLean.
Chernis Lynn in favor.
Are we doing this through eScribe? Yes. So could we, yes, please? Can we open the vote?
Chernis Lynn in favor.
Lee's in favor.
Thank you. Trustee Wong, Trustee Patel?
Wong in favor, please.
Here. Oh, okay. I don't think Trustee Patel's here yet. Okay, thank you.
Trustee Hassan in favor.
And that carries. Trustee Hassan, you're not on this committee. But much appreciated for your vote. Okay, so that's that passes. It's not coming up on the screen. 8-0. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to our co-chairs for coming and speaking to us today. I know my secondary alternative school is a place for students who have come back to us from hardship, and I very much appreciate the work they do. So the next item on our agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
The next item on our agenda is item number 5, update on the 2023-24 Grants for Student Needs announcement. And I'll pass the chair to Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. There is a presentation that we will put up that will help us to walk through the announcement from last week. And thank you. If you can just move to the next slide. Just want to start with last week on Monday, we did receive a number of memos from the ministry with regards to the grant for student needs and for funding for next year. So you'll see we received 5 different memos, all relating to, one relating to the new bill that they are proposing, one for the GSM, one for PPFs, one specifically to explain the changes to transportation funding, and then one in regards to capital funding for next year. At the time, the technical paper and the EFIS forms were also released. So since the release, Craig Snyder and his team have been working tirelessly to determine the outcome for TDSB and to look at the impact that it does have. So what we want to do today is just to go through really the major changes that have been announced through specifically B-Memo 4 and B-Memo 5, because that's where a significant amount of the funding was proposed. So if we can move to the next slide, please. The first thing that they talked about, and there is a new funding formula for student transportation. So the ministry is implementing a new student transportation grant funding framework, and they quote that it is transparent, equitable, and focused on reliability. So boards did know that this was coming, and basically it's like when they looked at the looked at the special education funding a number of years ago, where the total funding across the province would remain the same, but it would be reallocated based on this new funding formula. So there would be, and I quote, some winner boards and some loser boards with regards to the funding. So TDSB was, in fact, one of the boards that is receiving more funding. We are still determining what that impact is on TDSB. When we look at the GSN projections, it looks like an additional $13 million, which is fairly significant. But there are components that have additional expenses related to them that we have not yet incurred. And there are components that are enveloped. So we are still working to determine what the actual increase in funding is and the impact on the overall budget. And I'll give you an example. driver salaries and benefits have been enveloped, and they are expecting boards to pay $23 an hour for bus drivers. So all boards across the province are looking at their contracts that they have in place, possibly having to renegotiate or at least open up those contracts with regards to wages. So there are a number of things that we have to look through that the memo, work with our transportation consortium in order to determine the impact on TDSB. But we do believe that it is positive. The ministry did indicate in their call on Friday that they did intend this funding to get rid of the driver shortage issue across the province. So that is a lofty goal, I will say. But this will, I think some of the components of the funding should help us to reduce the driver shortage in TDSB. So that is good news. If we can move to the next slide, and just for presentation purposes, I think if we hold questions until the end and we can go back to the different slides if necessary, that'd probably be the best. There is funding for remote learning administration. So the funding is provided based on remote learning enrollment. The board will receive $479.27 per FTE to support principals, vice principals, school office support, and IT, which sounds great. But, and this is a significant, but the FTE will be excluded from other school-based and school facility-based allocations within the GSN. So that means that when we receive, for example, school operations money for caretaking, for maintenance, for utilities, that sort of thing, the enrollment related to remote learning will be removed. And as we know, when we look at the makeup of our remote learning across the TDSB, it may be 2, 3, 10 students from each school, but there will not be a significant or any decrease in the actual costs of operating the schools. So we are still looking at how this will impact the overall funding. So the increase in funding has been announced. It's about $600,000 for TDSB, but we're not sure yet of what the negative impact with regards to removing the FTE from the calculation for the school-based facility allocations. If we can go to the next slide, please. We are receiving funding for safe and clean school supports, and there will be about $1.2 million provided to TDSB for additional services that support student well-being and maintain clean schools. The examples that they give are professionals, paraprofessionals, which include psychologists, social workers, and child and youth workers, educational assistants, and custodial and maintenance. The grant has indicated that the board has flexibility within these categories and priority should be given to the professional, paraprofessional supports. So again, we do know that the impact on TDSB is projected to be 1.2 million. We are reviewing this calculation and we'll look at recommendations based on not only what we will be receiving, but also what we currently have in place. Summer learning supports, no significant change here other than it moved from, sorry, if we can go to the next slide. It moved from being a priorities and partnership funding, so separate funding still from the ministry, into the GSN. And when that happens, it usually provides a little bit more stability for boards related to that funding, because when something's part of the GSN, it usually means that it will continue on an annual basis. So there's good news there. What I will say is that when the ministry announces an increase in the GSN, they will count this funding moved into the GSN as an increase, although the funding was previously being provided just under a different way of providing that funding through PPF. Next slide, please. The ministry has provided through the GSN for next year updates related to salary benchmarks. So they are reflecting the the collective agreements that have been ratified with CUPE at the $1 per hour increase. You'll see that increase for from 21-22 to 22-23, and a further dollar increase from 22-23 to 23-24. In addition, the ministry has included in the revenue or in the grants a 1.25% increase for teacher salary benchmarks, again from 21-22 to 22-23, and then from a further 1.25 from 22-23 to 23-24. What that means, especially when it's based on a percentage, when we apply a percentage increase to our grid, which is already higher than the province's grid, it does actually increase the difference between what we're funded and what we're actually paying out. And so that will continue to increase as the province negotiates on our behalf related to our teacher salary benchmarks. And in addition, the Employee Life and Health Trust benefits have been adjusted for CUPE education workers based on their collective agreements. And the good news is that the ministry did announce that they will continue to provide the Student Support for Students Fund. And when we looked at our school-based staffing, when we approved that back in March, we did include this funding. So we did anticipate that that would continue, and it is, so that's good news. Next slide, please. What the GSN didn't include was an increase related to statutory benefits or costs related to sick leave. And so this chart here will show you the projected incremental unfunded benefit costs from 2018-19 to 2023-24. So I think that the two that we want to concentrate the most on, when we look at CPP, CPP has increased from 2018-19 to 23-24, $28.8 million for TDSB. $28.8 million, you can imagine how many positions that we would have had to reduce in order to be able to fund that, because we have no control at all over CPP, right? That it's a statutory benefit. It is determined by the federal government, and therefore we have to pay the employer portion. There's nothing we can do. There's no programs that we can put in place or anything that impacts that. So over the last 5 years, that's increased $28.8 million with no corresponding increase in revenue. So all things being equal, even if we were in a balanced budget situation, if we didn't do anything different, we would be in a $28.8 million deficit right now just because of CPP. And so in order to prepare a balanced budget, and this impacts all boards across Ontario, boards are actually having to make reductions in their staffing, most likely because staffing is such a significant component in order to balance their budgets. So I just wanted everybody to be aware here that between long-term disability, WSIB, CPP, employee EI, and then the sick leave, school-based sick leave costs that are over the amount that we're funded for, it totals $47.3 million. So if we were funded even at this amount, obviously when we were looking at balancing our budget, we would be in a much better situation. So I just wanted to highlight that here, that the GSN did not include anything to help us in this situation. If we can move to the next slide, please. Another highlight of the GSN is the realignment of Indigenous education funding. It is intended to better support Indigenous education priorities, and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit studies allocation has been revised to encourage boards to offer First Nations, Métis, and Inuit studies courses. Boards continue to be required to deliver these courses in any school where a minimum of 8 students in that school are enrolled in the course. So those courses will be funded with a combination of the Pupil Foundation Grant, which is how other courses are funded, and a supplement through the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Studies allocation to support the cost where there are at least 8 students in the class. And any enrollment up to 23, which is the average class size that the ministry funds through the Pupil Foundation Grant, there will be a supplement between 8 and 23. If there are at least 23 students taking a First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Studies class, then there will be no additional funding provided through the ministry. Other highlights, as I indicated, there are PPFs that have been transferred to the GSN, the SHISM expansion, the early math interventions for students with special education needs, and the demographic data gathering. They have been, they were previously funded through PPFs and are now being funded through the GSN. And this memo and this release also did confirm that the COVID Learning Recovery Fund, so that $31.5 million, which funded 522 positions at TDSB, there was confirmation that that funding has expired. The next slide, please. So the ministry did recognize and has in the past recognized that there are some costs that continue to increase. So there is a non-staff benchmark increase of 2% related to the school operations allocation, and that's to assist schools with managing increases in commodity prices. And so that would be utilities, insurance, and other facilities-related costs. The ministry is providing funding for ventilation supports, so support to optimize ventilation in schools, and mostly that would cover the filters that are required to be changed in the HEPA filtration units. And then the ministry has indicated that they are going to review the special incidents portion of the special education grant, and that is the grant where there are 2 adults that are required to support 1 student. And the boards right now are receiving $27,000 based on an application basis. So the ministry is looking at this grant, and for 23-24, they will be funding it based on our historical special incidents portion funding, looking to revise it for 24-25 to make adjustments to that funding. The next slide, please. Some other changes. There will be differentiated funding for online learning, meaning that in secondary schools, there is an expectation that secondary students will be taking an online credit. So the way that they're funding us is assuming that 22.5% of secondary students will take 1 course online in 23-24. And that would be, the reason that this would create a difference in funding is because those online classes are using an average class size of 30 versus 23. So there would be less funding for those online courses. In addition, this is the final year of a 12-year phase out for the retirement gratuities. So rather than the benchmark funding increasing, it's actually decreasing by 0.167% to phase out the funding that they provided for the retirement gratuities. Next slide, please. For the school operations allocation, this is also the final year of the phase out for the updates for the supplementary area factor. Basically to reflect the change in the secondary class size. So there is also a reduction there to come in line with an announcement that they made 5 years ago. And then this next piece, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more in our next report, the accommodation costs in school-based childcare spaces. So the ministry is developing a new sustainable childcare funding model. And as part of this, the ministry is investigating options that would support the standardization of accommodation costs in school-based staffing with rates set by the ministry effective January 1st, 2024. So this does impact the umbrella agreements that we have with the city or had with the city, and we will talk about that further in our next report. The next couple of slides just refer to the highlights of the PPFs, the priorities and partnership funding that was released. So the grants listed, and all of these grants are in the financial facts document. So what we've done is gone through all of the PPFs that were received in the current year. And if they are continuing in approximately the same amounts, you see them listed on this page, and there are a number of them. And on the next page, if we look, so currently we receive $4.5 million from the ministry for math strategy. This funding has been discontinued. However, there is a new math recovery plan, which the ministry is funding, and there are 3 components of that. The dollar amount is approximately the same. So again, the ministry is still funding math, just have slightly different focus with the funding. And as we receive more information, we will have a better understanding of how of what needs to be included in these PPFs. There's about $1.5 million in professional assessments and systemic evidence-based reading programs that has been discontinued. However, there is new funding to support early reading and reading intervention, both evaluation tools and also reading intervention staffing, totaling $9 million. There's an additional $11.1 million of new funding to fund staff to support de-streaming and transition to high school. So in all of these instances, we are awaiting more detailed information to determine the requirements for this spending. Sometimes they say it has to be spent on staffing. Sometimes they say a portion of it has to be spent on professional development, that sort of thing. So we need to have that information before we can determine how it gets spent. And in some cases, the funding may support programs that we already have in existence. So that funding may actually help us, even though it's through PPF, to balance the budget that we would usually balance with GSN funding. So that's good news as well. And again, we are looking at how we can use the PPFs to offset some existing costs. So I will stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Executive Officer Snyder, who's going to walk us through the budget timelines now as we have the GSN, so we can be a little bit more concrete in our expectations.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'd like to present what we suggest as a timeline to get us to June 30th, a balanced budget. So as we know, April 17th, ministries announced GSN and to provide us the EFIS forms we need, as well as the technical paper to start our work. So we're currently reviewing and assessing the funds that were provided to us, and we're reporting tonight to you about what we know so far about the GSN. We are going to start discussions with the ministry around options to balance, as well as the use of POD for some of our capital issues we have within the budget. We are going to work with the associate directors and director on a preliminary GSN update memo to you, and on an update on our current projections and our status of options to balance. As you know, as we work through the school-based staffing, some of those windows and options are taken away or have been approved. So we'll work through that in the early part of May. You'll see May 2nd, we go to our executive council to talk about the update and where we look like we're being. May 8th, we would bring an updated financial position to the DAD table, as well as the next slide, please, to the executive table, saying a copy of the draft report coming back to you in the Finance Budget Enrollment Committee. We are targeting May 15th for that, and at the regular FBAC that day. 2 big events will happen besides our contract awards and other regular business of the committee. The first will be that we will present the second quarter report for this year. So that'll show you actuals halfway through the year to the end of February. But the more important of the part of that report, it's a forecast to the year end for our current school year. So that's an important piece of information for you to know how any further use of reserves is anticipated and to update you where we are there. The second part of the meeting, of course, is to discuss the actual financial position of the board, that we've done the analysis and come back to show you where the financial position is for 23-24. Concurrently with that meeting and following the next days, we'll start to finalize the options to balance with the director and associate directors and executive council, and we'll start to draft the report May 22nd and May 23rd, working through those processes to present our draft report, get feedback from those, as well as the chair and vice chair committee. And if I could have the next slide, please. And then on May 29th, due to the timing, the final report with the options to balance will be presented at the director and associate directors table. Unfortunately, due to the timing of the meeting being June 1st, it won't be able to go to the executive table or the chair, vice chair table for review. It'll be reviewed there only as information because board service will have already published it on the website. So that will come forward, as well as the capital budget through those, and be presented both at the February 1st FBAC, which will be a presentation of those options to balance the operations, as well as the capital budget will be presented at that point in time. We are suggesting that on June 5th and 6th, we would hold public information sessions, webinars, as we have previously. We're thinking of one during the day office hours and two in the evening, so we hit as many of our stakeholders as possible. We are suggesting that to hear deputations as the importance of the budget, that we would set aside June 12th for a special FBAC just to hear delegations and allow that time for our public to provide feedback. Next slide, please. And then June 13th, we would take that feedback we heard at the deputations, as well as what we heard through the webinars and the questions asked at the webinars, and bring a comprehensive feedback package to you on the 13th at a special FBAC, and then have a final discussion with you around the revisions and the budget that was presented to give feedback to staff to work on the final report to go to board. We look at the 13th and 19th to do some additional work on that with our director and associate directors, as well as our executive council. Again, due to the timelines and tightness, the reports will go to board services on the 19th after they've cleared the director and associate directors table. Because of the timeline to the June 22nd, we're suggesting a special FBAC, and we're optimistic that that would be a recommendation from FBAC to the board to approve both the capital and operating budgets, and then a special board June 28th to have a formal approval of the capital and operating budgets, which staff would submit by June 30th to the Ministry of Education. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Stacy.
Thank you, and through the chair, just open for any questions related to this update. Thank you.
Okay, so for questions, we have Trustee Lee.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff, and everyone on the team for providing this fantastic report. I think I have a really good picture on what's happening right now. And I'm also happy to say that I think some of the changes that are made to the funding by the province, especially on the transportation, the learning, and the math, I think those are welcome, because I do think they, to a degree, reflects the absolute financial need of this board to improve both education and overall experience of our kids at the school. I do have a question on the process that we're going through this budget season. I do know that, so my understanding is there will be 2 meetings where this committee can discuss what we're looking at from a budget perspective. And I guess the first meeting is for feedback and inputs, and the second meeting is for decision making. Can I get a sense from staff on what is the lead up time towards the first meeting before which the trustees will get the overall information package or the meeting agenda with all the details to be discussed?
So Trustee Liam, just confirming, so on May 15th, we will be updating the financial position of the board, and that should be, we should be able to provide that at regular timelines for trustees to review. With regards to the next meeting, which would be June 1st, and the options to balance, again, as we work through those, we will be able to provide during the with the regular timelines, so usually provided the week before to trustees for review. When we get to the special FBEC on the 13th, we will try to take into account anything that we hear the night before. So we will look at ways to ensure that trustees have the information that they need to make decisions, because these are very big decisions, in advance, and possibly have to bring some additional information the day of. So I hope that helps provide you with some assurance that you will receive it in a timely manner.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker. I just actually, unfortunately, the answer actually brings up more questions. When you say the options to balance, is that towards the upcoming year's budget that we will be presented for in May?
Through the chair, just confirming, you're asking, are we bringing forward options to balance next year's budget?
Yeah, so when you say options to balance, maybe I didn't understand this correctly. What is that for? Is that for the 2024 school year budget?
Yes, it is, the 23-24 budget.
Okay, so basically what I'm understanding is in May, you will present us with the financial position and all the puts and takes that needs to go into a decision-making process to construct next year's budget. And then between whenever the May date is, sorry, what was the May date? I heard mid-May sometime, right?
Sorry, the May 15th.
May 15th. So between May 15th and June 13th, I believe that was a date. Sorry, I got my, I don't remember the exact dates, but that period of time is when trustees can discuss, study, and understand what the situation is. And you're looking for decisions on either the May 13th, no, not May, the June 13th meeting or the June 20 something meeting, correct?
That's correct. So June 13th would be options based on trustee feedback. And then June 22nd would be when we bring the final budget piece for trustees to approve to bring to board on the 28th.
Okay, and just to triple confirm to make sure that I understood it, and I apologize if this is repetitive, we will get the information 1 month before we need to make a decision on it.
1 week, yes?
Did you say 1 month? Because I thought you said the information was going to be presented on May 15th.
Yes, sorry.
Just for clarity, through you, Madam Chair, May 15th, you'll get the financial position of the board. June 1st, you get staff's recommendations for the options to balance. And then the June 13th meeting will be where you'll have time to ask further questions or clarification of things after the June 1st meeting. We're happy to take questions, obviously, at June 1st as well. But June 13th would be the option to ask further questions and clarification after hearing deputations. And then June 22nd would be bringing the final draft report based on your feedback to you.
Got it. Perfect. So information on June 1st, we got almost 2 weeks for to study it and understand it and consult with the community and each other if possible, if needed. June 13th, we have a meeting to discuss and to present options. June 22nd, sorry, I forgot that date again. It's when we make the final decision, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. That's clear. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and I will pass the chair to Trustee Didavides. Thank you. So just to follow, well, first I'll follow up on Trustee Lee's question. Just that we have also discussed planning for some more sessions, including informal budget sessions. Knowing that this might be a difficult budget year, but also because half our board is new. So some more informal budget sessions for us to hash through what the budget is, and we'll look at adding those in late May if needed, and especially if trustees want them. So my questions, one on transportation, and the new bill, Bill 98 that was proposed. There's a lot of wording that says enhanced reporting. In several places it says enhanced reporting. Would we foresee that this would come with increased costs? That staff time being cost?
Thank you. Through the chair, I was just going to say that there will definitely be more time that is involved in producing these reports. There were a lot of questions asked from provincial counterparts on Friday. There was an opportunity for directors and SBOs to ask questions of the ministry with regards to the GSN, and the enhanced reporting was one of the questions that came up a number of times, and there was not a lot of information provided at this time. It's to come, but yes, there will likely be more. Well, there will be more time that will be required to complete it.
Okay, so also on transportation, the ministry is expecting the driver shortages to go away, but I know that pay isn't, hourly wage is not necessarily the defining factor for why driving school buses is not an attractive job. So could you remind me how many hours a day does a driver typically work if they're doing the before and after school runs?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't, it's hard to say because all the routes are different. Depends how many runs you're doing on a route, and it would depend on how many students are in the buses and the length of the run. So I would say conservatively, you're looking at probably 2.5 to 3 hours in the morning and in the evening to do it, because you have to inspect your bus, you have to start it, clean it, and all the rest of it, and then you got to return it to your parking spot. But it would vary significantly by route and number of buses.
So would it be full-time hours?
It's full-time in that you're going to get the same hours the whole way through the 10 months. For every school day, you're going to run your route the same way for the most part. You may get extra hours if you're a large bus driver and you have the opportunity to do field trips during the day, in the middle of the day, that would give you extra hours of work.
So, sorry, the piece on childcare, they use the term sustainable school-based childcare. Did the ministry indicate what they think sustainable means? Does this mean sustainable from their budget bottom line or sustainable from our budget bottom line?
Thank you, and through the chair, they said more information was coming, although in the letter that we received from them, they indicated that they would likely be looking at the benchmarks that they use in the GSN for facilities, which is about $9.94 for elementary schools and $9.95 for secondary schools. The amount that we are estimating is a break-even cost is $15.97 per square. These are per square foot. So there would still be a significant difference between the ministry's amount that they would be funding versus our actual costs.
Okay, that's a big difference. With regards to the special incidents funding, did they indicate which aspects they're reviewing? Is it just the financial amount per student, or are they also reviewing who qualifies? Like which categories of need for students qualify for that?
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm just trying to find where they indicated. They're undertaking a review to modernize the special incidents portion allocation and temporarily adjust, so they don't really talk about what they're looking at, just about modernizing it.
Okay. Sorry, statutory benefits. this one is mind-boggling for me in terms of I don't get how they don't think they need to cover costs that we can't control and that are brought to us from other levels of the government. Has staff had conversations with the ministry about the fact that they need to cover statutory benefits costs, and what feedback have they given?
So thank you, and through the chair, COSBO, which is the executive members of the superintendents of business across the province, met with the ministry on Thursday, and then there was a teleconference on Friday. Statutory benefits did come up in both of those instances, and the reply is that we do have some flexibility in our existing grants to be able to deal with increased costs. And this also came up when a number of people were asking about inflation, and recognizing that inflation changes year over year. They did indicate that they wouldn't be able to cover the entire amount of inflation, because when it goes down, grants don't decrease. So they referred to the flexibility that's provided in the current GSN to be able to assist us in covering those costs. In reality, when you have a balanced budget and costs are going up, and I had done the math, and I'm just going to look again, $28.8 million for CPP only is 262 teaching positions. So that's what you need to look at it. We would have had to make reductions of equating to 262 teaching positions in order to cover just CPP alone. And the reason why I go to CPP is because it's such a significant increase, and there is nothing that we can do to control it.
Thank you. That's all for me right now. I'll take the chair back. And then we have, Trustee Chernos-Lynn.
Thank you. I just want to go back and I do share your concerns, Trustee Arts, about the statutory benefits and the sick leave costs, because those, in my mind, should just be a straight transfer payment from the government. I find it enraging, honestly, that we have to take those supports for students and use what we would normally pay to support students, and we're transferring it to pay for statutory benefits, which is really something the government ought to be covering. But since you've already spoken about that, I will skip that, and I will stop harping on it, because I feel others will probably want to talk about that tonight too. I just wanted to ask, I want to make sure I understand there was a slide about the supplement on the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit courses. I wonder if staff can just explain. I'm not sure I fully understand it. Are we losing funding that we might have had before? Like, has there been a change here now that more boards are supporting Indigenous education in terms of like the grade 11 course the way we have done? Or is this just, is this a status quo thing?
Thank you, and through the chair, I believe that as more boards move to offering, say, the grade 11 English course as a First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Studies course, and there was a supplement that was provided there, the ministry is looking at it and saying if the enrollment is that of the traditional class size enrollment of 23, then the funding would be the same. So there would be no supplement there, but they are recognizing that if there are less than 23 students, they will provide a supplement up to 23, and they would not do that for any other course. So I believe that if all of our courses were offered at 23 students, all things being equal, we would be losing funding with this new method of funding versus previous. But the intention is to be able to supplement any First Nation, Métis, and Inuit course that has at least 8 students up to the 23, that's the average class size. But I will also say that in the projections that the ministry has provided to the board, that TDSB looks like the funding is increasing for our Indigenous education. So staff still has to look at the actual calculations to determine how that was calculated to ensure that that's correct. Because on first glance, this looks like it would likely reduce funding, but our projections show an increase in funding.
Okay, so because the class size is 20, like the average class size that we're supposed to be at is 23, and that would be our expectation as we move to this eventually, having this across the board, we would expect that we wouldn't see supplements for those classes down the road. That's the expectation.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. My next question is, can you just explain what special incidents portion funding is? I'm not familiar with that, or at least I don't remember what it is.
Thank you. And through the chair, that is the funding that we receive on an application basis for the students that have extreme needs that require 2 adults to support them on a full-time basis. And so currently, if a student requires 2 adults, we receive it's about $27,000 per application. So it would not cover the cost of an additional adult supporting the student. So it's, I mean, I can be hopeful that the province is looking at that to possibly be able to bring the funding in line with the true costs of providing the support.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back and read that slide again just to make sure I understand it. That's it for me. I'll let others ask questions.
Trustee Didavides?
Thank you. A couple of my questions were asked already in regards to transportation, and then I had the same question our chair just asked. I'll be really quick. My first question, vis-a-vis our $63 million deficit or estimate of a deficit, having seen some of the numbers, do we understand the board's position to be further in debt or a little closer to the surface?
Thank you. And through the chair, that's what we are working through right now. And it really does depend a lot on the PPFs that we've received and how we can support programs that we already have in place, which we have confirmed with the ministry that we can do. But we still need to work through the numbers, because I will be honest, I was hopeful that we would receive some increased funding, for example, for statutory benefits. That didn't come. So that is a budget pressure, again, that hasn't gone away necessarily, or for sick leave. But there are, and we need to figure out, for example, how much of the transportation grant will be able to offset the budget versus how much would be enveloped. So that's the work that's being done to present the updated financial position on May 15th. But staff is hopeful that some of the PPFs will be able to offset some of the costs and reduce the overall deficit.
Thanks. And then I had a question. I'm not quite sure how to frame it. So if it gets too long or complicated, I'll leave it for later, because we don't have all the information. But in page number 7, highlight of GSN, we have some estimates from what the ministry expects us due to the bargaining process to put forward as increases. Do we yet have a picture of any other pressures outside of the chart that you laid out for us that includes CPP and things of that nature? Do we foresee, for example, reduction of teaching positions in the classroom, things of that nature?
So thank you, and through the chair, with regards to the labor-related changes, we don't see any additional changes other than what they've announced. So we will, because they've included a 1.5 increase in funding, we will include a 1.25. We will include a 1.25 increase in our costs, which will increase that gap a little bit more. But with regards to benefits, we don't see any other increases right now. Although as we continue to monitor our sick leave in the current year, we will use our existing sick leave costs to help us to estimate the cost for next year. And so as we get further into the year, we will know for sure if what we've budgeted for the current year is actually realistic compared to our actual expenses.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Trustee Laskin.
Given our deputants are still in the room, I have a question for staff, and I'll relate it to the GSN, so it'll be in order. Do you know whether there is funding in the GSNs that will allow reading coaches to be included in central staffing in 2023, 2024? And if you can't answer that now, when would you know?
So thank you, and through the chair, there's no specific funding related to reading coaches. We do have a classification, reading intervention teachers, and there is funding there through the PPF. As we work through the GSN and determine where we are, as we indicated previously through school-based staffing, it will give us an opportunity to look at all of the changes that we've made to the budget and determine if there's any potential to reverse any of those, especially if it was a reduction. But at this point, I wouldn't know. There's nothing specifically related to coaches.
Thank you. So just to follow up on that, so if we won't know yet, probably until I think the earliest we would know what staff are thinking is May 15th. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through the chair, on May 15th, we'll have an idea of what our overall position is, and then we'll know if we will be able to possibly add back. And if we want to add back and we don't have room, what would we take away? So those are the conversations that we can have after May 15th.
So for trustees interested in moving motions to potentially add back staff, your advice would be to wait and see what actually is being presented on May 15th. And should we have additional motions, for example, adding back vice principals, which is probably number one on my list right now, that would be the time at which we should look at what staff are presenting first before we submit motions, and that would be May 15th. I just want to confirm that.
Through the chair, I would say May 29th would be that time when we bring back a report on the options to balance.
So on May 15th, we'll get a sense, but it's not until May 29th where we would know what staff is already determining to put back.
That's correct.
If any.
If any.
If any. Okay. And I know it might be a bit out of order, but is it possible for staff to address the delegations? Because we've never had to address us on the topic of the delegations, because we don't know anything more than what was sent to us by staff, by teachers. And I'd really wonder when we would get that clarity. If it's not now, when?
Yeah, I would ask that Director Russell Rollins start.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I believe that it would be important to do this in a way that reflects our normal procedure with delegations, and so staff will provide follow-up information to trustees about the main issues raised by the delegates directly in an email message that will follow by midweek.
Thank you very much. So in the next day or two, we'll get an understanding. And will that please be shared with the people that have written to us as well? or through their superintendents to get it to staff directly?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, we will ensure that if there are any messages that have been missed in sharing with our staff, that they too will receive a response so that we are fully transparent about the reasons for the decisions and any clarification with regards to information shared this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just didn't want them to leave before hearing something. Now I'll get on to my questions. So thank you for clarifying the timing of when amendments might be in order. So I am clear on that. Is there anything related to the announcement about addressing violence prevention today that goes against things we are currently doing? So it wouldn't be seen as new money, or is it actually new money? And would that be part of the budget moving forward and part of the operating budget that you'll speak to us about on May 15th? Through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I will begin with regards to the funding received by the Toronto District School Board, specifically in today's announcement. That funding announcement came through a PPF to the board, and the board has been asked to submit a specific plan with regards to the utilization of that funding. It has two main purposes earmarked for the funding, and I don't have the numbers committed to memory. The first is a further support for Focus on Youth, and the second is support for community partnerships. So those are the two main areas. This funding is to be utilized prior to the February 2nd. Thank you very much, Associate Director, of 2024.
2024, okay. Thank you very much. So I'm assuming that will get incorporated into the bigger picture if it's come as a PPF for us. Thank you. I'm concerned about June 28th. As I'm sure everyone realizes, that's graduation week. And nothing was even put as placeholder in our calendar after the June board meeting. So I'm really asking, is there any possibility of moving that meeting? Like, can we save a week somewhere? Because I'm really concerned about that. Even if we have to ask the ministry for an extension beyond June 30th, or does staff feel that truly is the only date we could hold this meeting? Through you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Chair, it was a bit of a dream that we were going to be able to conclude the board's deliberations by mid-June, especially in light of the feedback that we received last year as we went down to the very end with regards to our budget deliberations. So staff was very aware of the challenges with deliberating this important budget during that particular week. I think it's the best we can do, but having said that, if there is an opportunity for us to find a week or condense timelines and for us to actually be able to ensure that you have the information you need in advance of a meeting to be able to deliberate and ask questions, we will certainly make changes to those timelines.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. In the meantime, can we get sent placeholders in our calendars for all these dates ASAP? For you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, through the chair, yes.
Thank you. So given the fact that there is zero recognition through the GSNs that you've clarified and presented a slide on about the cost benefits that are completely out of our control. I mean, I get that we make some decisions here that the ministry doesn't agree with, and they say to us, oh, you have flexibility, therefore you make your different choices. But to think that one covers inflation and the increase in benefits through flexibility, and I'll use that word in quotation marks, is really absurd and completely, I mean, any reasonable person would understand that if your costs go up and you have no funding source, you have to cut something else to pay for it. And I don't understand why the ministry's put us in that position, and not just us, but all boards across the province. So I actually have a business arising motion, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to wait to place it to make sure everyone gets their questions, but please come back to me because my time is up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. The next we have Trustee Shan.
The presentation, the slide deck that was presented, would that be uploaded onto the website? Because it wasn't part of the... Okay. So I was asking, through you, Madam Chair, if the presentation will be uploaded online.
As part of this agenda.
Through the chair, yes, it will be.
So just to clarify through you, Madam Chair, the actual deficit or roughly approximate deficit of what we are facing after this GSN announcement would be known May 15th. So May 15th, we would know. On the transportation, it said $23 an hour salaries and benefit. Does it include benefits, or is it $23 per hour plus benefits?
Through the chairs plus benefits.
Plus benefits. So the base rate is $23. Thank you. The remote learning dollars that were promised or that were allocated, does that include, because we have our teachers working out of our physical sites for remote learning, does it include the cost associated with maintaining those physical spaces, or is it assumed to be fully virtual?
Thank you. And through the chair, it does not make those assumptions. So it's assuming that everybody's fully virtual. And I will say that the way that TDSB especially does remote learning for elementary schools, which is the way that most boards do it across the province, where the students are attached to a specific school, the ministry is anticipating that there would be a remote learning elementary school and that they would not be attached to the schools and they would have their own different sort of principal and that sort of thing. So it's even a different model than most boards are currently providing remote learning through.
Okay. There was a list for Safe and Clean Schools supplement that included completely 3 different kind of categories in that, and it said discretion up to the... So when would we know what TDSB is going to be using that grant for, like custodial, educational assistant, and psychotherapist or psychological support? Like, how would we know how this school board is going to staff up prioritizing that?
Thank you. Through the chair, that would likely come on May 29th as well as part of the overall looking at how we're going to balance the budget. How we would use that $1.2 million would be indicated at that time.
Through you, Madam Chair, there was a remark about the summer programs being lumped together, the PPF being lumped together as GSN, which obviously provides sustainability, but may inflate the number to look like it's much higher than what we've gotten before. Do we know what the percentage is around? What would the PPF percentage be last year as compared to the GSN, or was that something we'll be able to get or communicate to the community later?
Through the chair, we can provide that information as well. I'm just looking at the numbers. We're looking at, I think, approximately $500,000 that moved into the GSN from PPFs.
Okay.
That would have been counted as part of our increase to the GSN.
Okay. On one of the slides, through you, Madam Chair, the early reading and reading intervention money was significantly higher than what is being scrapped, like 1.5 to a $9 million. And then the later remark was about, we don't have the details as to what we can spend that on. Is there a possibility for staff to go ahead and start developing a plan and communicate to the ministry that this is what our expertise is in terms of frontline, that this is what we think would be useful for that $9 million to be used for? ahead of any kind of communication, or are we expecting some communication to come soon?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, there have been ongoing conversations with the Ministry of Education about literacy development in response to the Right to Read report. It is our expectation that there will be a detailed memo outlining expectations with regards to how that funding must be allocated.
Through you, Madam Chair, do we know roughly when that would be? It would be soon, pretty soon, or when?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, we hope it's very soon, but I would be loath to commit to a timeline.
Okay, thank you. I think that would be a clear place where we could actually communicate how important the reading coaches are and the kind of model that we already have that could be expanded further. The de-streaming support of $11.1 million, again, it's one of those things that I heard don't have clear instruction as to what that should be spent for. Where is the conversation at around us telling potentially the ministry where we would need that support to go?
Sorry, thank you. And through the chair, I'm just looking, so they are very specific about what it is intended to support and who it is intended to support. So we will use that information along with what happens is the ministry makes this announcement, they provide about a paragraph about it, and then a little bit later, they'll give us what they call a transfer payment agreement, where there's an agreement that lists exactly how boards are expected to use that funding. And so it is intended to support grade 7 and 8 students who are transitioning to secondary schools, as well as grade 9 and 10 students with de-streaming. And so we would look at, again, what supports do we have in place currently that possibly would be funded by that $11.1 million, and then what additional supports would best support those students. And that's where I think we would use the transfer payment agreement to help us to see what the expectations are, but I think we will have some flexibility in determining how to best support those students.
Thank you. Going to the last set of slides around dates, for multiple reasons, obviously graduation dates is critical for a lot of the trustees, especially first-time trustees, to be part of that process. So it'll be good to see something changed around that. The second thing is also it is right at the end of the school year as well. And, in some ways, if there are bad news gets to people when they're leaving, but it gives at least some sort of a way to plan around some of those decisions as well. So it would also support a potential moving of those dates to see if we can finish that meeting at least 4 or 5 days ahead of the date that's been planned. The final question I have is around ward forums, and many of the trustees have had, and some might be planning to have ward forums around budget to engage the community for input and to inform the community of what's pending. So through you, Madam Chair, what would the staff's recommendation be for that period where that would make the most amount of sense so that the community is actually involved in a time where the input might be shaping what happens in this boardroom?
So thank you, and through the chair, it's a good question, and we were looking at the importance of getting public feedback and recognizing the timelines and how condensed they are, and wanting to ensure that we provide that time. Staff's time needs to be, we want to make sure that we're able to provide staff support when we're presenting to the public. So right now, what we're indicating as Executive Officer Snyder said was open forums for public feedback, and there are 3 of them in particular. So we can take away and have discussions about ward forums and how, if they can fit into here, but if we aren't able to support them, if staff isn't able to support them appropriately, then the way that it would be best to gather that feedback would be through those 3 sessions in that first week in June. So, but we can take that away because we recognize that maybe trustees have already made some commitments. at the same time, if we do move to ward forums, to be able to do them jointly, especially if they're specifically related to budget, would be really, really helpful and important to be able to support trustees in those areas. So I know that there are some trustees that were talking about joint, maybe even 3 or 4 coming together would be helpful if staff is going to be asked to support them.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Trustee Rajagula Singham.
Thank you, through the chair. I wanted to thank staff for their presentation and breaking down that information for us. I know we're still waiting on restrictions and requirements for each pocket, but I have 2 questions. The first one's on ventilation. I know in the past 2 years, we've done a lot of work around our HVAC systems and ventilations. At this point, have we replaced all of our HEPA filters, and how often do they need to be changed?
I'll ask Executive Officer Pachetti to take this.
Thank you, and through the chair. So the manufacturer's recommendation is on the 3rd year of use is when you would change the filters inside the HEPA filters. And that is in fact what we are planning to do this summer. We did pre-order filters last year when some funding was made available by the ministry. And we have we have, I'd say, about 3/4 of the filters available to us. And this new funding announcement allows us to purchase more filters. So we will be proceeding with doing that work this summer.
Thank you, through the chair. And do we know for this particular funding, are we able, if we don't need to use all of it, are we able to use that funding somewhere else, or is it fixed?
Thank you, and through the chair, I believe that it is enveloped for that specific purpose.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, my next question is, hearing about transportation, and as we're kind of going deeper into this process, I was wondering if we'd be able to get a better breakdown of kind of which students are using transportation for what programming, and possibly ward by ward or a learning center, because I'm reflecting on the first year that we did this budget process in our term. And when at that time, French transportation was one of the proposed reductions. And at that time, it was through this process that we learned that when we looked at all of Scarborough together, they had less French programming than other individual wards. And that conversation, at least for me, helped me better understand the French program, which students and their demographics in extended French versus French immersion, and how busing was used as kind of a Band-Aid solution post-amalgamation, and really inequities we have when it comes to equal access to programming and services. So this really highlighted kind of different conversations. So I'm just wondering, as we go deeper in this process, if we can kind of get a breakdown of, what students are using transportation for what and where, because I think that really help us better understand the impact of transportation and how this funding is going to work.
Thank you, and through the chair, we can look at providing how we provide that information to trustees and bring it back for sure. And I will say that the ministry, through the funding in one of those memos that was attached or is indicated in this presentation, is all about the transportation funding, but it does look at benchmarks and expectations across the province in trying to standardize transportation. So I think looking at that from TDSB's perspective will be important as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so next on the list, we have Trustee McLean, and I'm just going to say, since we have a hard stop at 6:30, you have to be the last speaker, and we would have to resume this after the special PPC. Yes, Ms. Joseph Dowers is confirming. So Trustee McLean, go ahead, and then we will have to pause.
Okay, thank you, and through the chair. I'd like to better understand, and I'm going to apologize because I left the room briefly, so if this was covered by one of my colleagues, but like this, the government's whole back to basics concept of, this new funding they announced. There was 4.5 in the math strategy, which they're discontinuing, and then there's a new math recovery plan. Did they, in essence, talk about a new plan and a new direction and new money and actually give us no new money?
Thank you, and through the chair, yeah, the math strategy funding that was previously provided, totaling $4.5 million, a significant amount of it, I think the focus is different, but the funding is approximately the same.
But he had a press conference and talked about new stuff and a new initiative and a new thing and gave us no money.
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I was paying attention. Okay. 2% for costs. I mean, this isn't working in my house, so I'm really interested to see if the 2% is working here. And I'd like to, privately get, someone to help me with my household budgeting after the fact. But I'm interested if the 2% that the government is allowing we think is going to accurately reflect the expenses we're going to incur.
So thank you, and through the chair, no, it will not, especially on the utility side. I think we have some contracts already in place. There's about a 6.5% increase expected for next year. So the 2% obviously will not cover that expected increase. The other question that a lot of people on the line had on Friday with the ministry conversation was about software. Because as we move to a more digital provision of education, and also all of the software that we have in order to administer education, those software costs have a greater than 2% increase, and there's actually 0% allocated for any kind of increases related to those contractual obligations.
Thank you. As it relates to the online courses and the government seemed to, if I understood correctly, because some of our students are going to be online, there was a reduction in the structure, and there was 2 students here and 3 students here. But is that as problematic as I think it is when we start to factor in the aggregate effect of what that means across a board with 240,000 students in it?
So thank you, and through the chair, I'm not sure, and we can provide it unless somebody here knows how many remote learning students we have next year. But whatever the total is, by removing those remote students from the benchmarks related to especially facility-related costs, there will be a decrease in funding. There will not be a decrease in costs associated with those students because they are not all coming from one school.
Right. Okay. But it's when you start to do the aggregate, they're going to say, gee, that's 1,500 students, and you start to factor that in. You have like 8 less janitors or 8 less caretakers, and you start to have this effect because the aggregate kills us all the time because they always fund based on the whole, and we always get killed because, okay. Now I'm going to say this as politely as I possibly can, because we just got the GSNs, and I appreciate that people have been working around the clock to find this information and get us as much information as we possibly can. And but I'm looking at this schedule, and I'm really concerned. My experience with the board only goes back 1 term, and this process mirrors our first year in office in the budget process we went through year 1. We spent much more time with delegations than that's being allotted here. So I'm really concerned that there's not enough time for delegations. And I'll plant that because it builds on my next concern, which is we're going to hear from the public one night on June 12th. And then on June 13th, we're going to have, trustees are going to be expected to have our revisions and discussion one night after hearing from the public, given that as trustees, we can't meet privately, even if we were so inclined to meet privately. We can't meet privately to become organized and what did we hear? What do you think? How do we do this? How do we get together? By law, we're required to meet in public and have these discussions in public so that people can see them. Now, we have one day for that. And the session on the 13th, can someone explain the hard stop at 7 o'clock that on the surface seems like it's intentionally set to limit discussion of and the opportunity for trustees to make revisions? And we're going to have a really challenging debate in public. And the concept that the meeting is going to start at 4:30 and we're going to have to be done 2.5 hours later seems delusional based on my experience 4 years ago. So I'd like to understand the hard stop and the expectation that after 2.5 hours, we're going to be able to do this.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'm going to turn to, Denise. Is there an FSL meeting that evening? Is that June 13th? There was some, oh, Craig.
Through you, Madam Chair, the challenge was that there's a French as a second language advisory committee at 7 o'clock, and some trustees will have to attend. And this is the challenge. We're trying to get as much in for you, and we don't want to commit your time as well in June because of the graduations and other events. But that for that night, that's the challenge, that there's an FSLAC meeting that evening at 7 p.m.
Did we reach out to FSLAC and ask them if they would consider changing to one of the nights that isn't on our schedule? And that it's my understanding that we only have one chair, Chair Chirnos-Lynn is the only trustee on that committee. Now, I'm not suggesting we can do it without Chair Chirnos-Lynn. I'm just suggesting that, this seems like an art, what?
This takes precedence.
Yeah, like, it shouldn't, like that.
Yes, we can work with board services and the FSLAC committee and bring back some options, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. And I too would like to, the 28th is concerning to me. So I would like to see if what's possible in terms of a 1 week extension conceivably. I know other boards in the past that, June 30th is deemed to be this hard stop, must be, but I know other boards have gone into the early July and done this. So I guess I'd like staff to inquire about what's possible from the government's possibility and meet their requirement and avoid graduation week if possible.
Village?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to indicate that today EPSAC was supposed to be meeting. It got canceled today, but this meeting was scheduled during that. I would like the staff to treat all advisory committees the same way. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Interesting.
Sorry, Trustee McLean.
Well, I guess I'm done. But I'd like us to be exploring all the options because the 28th doesn't seem like a great night to be doing this. And and I'm not sure any of this, the timing of all of this isn't going to meet my experience of 4 years ago. Like this is someone wearing a Maple Leaf jersey tonight and trying to be really optimistic. And I'm nowhere near as optimistic whoever's created this schedule, okay? I'm having a hard time with this. I really can't see us given in that 2.5 hours and this all tied up and wrapped up in a bow in the timeline that's provided. So I'm a little concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, so still on the list, we have trustee Earhart, Laskin, and Shan, but we need to take a break now and then resume at 7 for PPC that we didn't finish last week. And then, when we finish that, we will come back. So do I need a motion to?
Motion to recess, Madam Chair?
Recess? Okay, we have trustee Laskin and trustee McLean. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, we are in recess.